So welcome everyone to Meaningful Interviews. I'm here today with a very good friend of mine, Dr. Eliezer Slavutin, originally from Australia. Eliezer and I know each other for, I think, 20 years or close to that, many, many years. And there's a lot to say, but time is short. It doesn't allow us to speak all details, but I met Eliezer in an interesting way. He has a brother-in-law who I knew from California, David Schwartz. And I asked David, I was moving to LA, to New York from LA, and he told me about his brother-in-law, Eliezer Slavutin. And I called Lee, and I asked if, if he wants to, I think, go to the Rebbe's Ohel and for a blessing. And he said, yeah, I have no idea who he is. No idea how he looked, who he was, nothing. I remember he took the F train from Manhattan, where he lived, to Borough Park, where I live, got into my car, and we went to the Ohel. In the middle of the ride, it happened to be Tisha B'Av. And I was treading carefully, and we're talking, and I mentioned tefillin, the tefillin, and I'm driving on the Belt Parkway, and he says to me, "Oh yeah, today we don't put on tefillin in the morning." I said, "How do you know that?" That was the last thing I would have thought, that Eliezer Slavutin, who I don't know who he is, and he's just David Schwartz's brother-in-law, and David wasn't particularly very religious, tells me that. So he says, "Oh, I read it in the back of the Art Scroll Siddur. And today, you put on tefillin in the afternoon." I said, "That's interesting. Yeah, you're right." Anyway, the next thing is we go into the Ohel, and I stand kind of far, and Lee positions himself, I believe it was next to the stone of the previous Rebbe. Because he's on the right and the Rebbe's on the left. I think that's my recollection. Anyway, and I noticed the way he's saying Tillim, davening, whatever, saying Tillim, and I was again very surprised. He's saying Tillim so seriously. It really was very, very interesting. On the way back, on his way out of the car, I asked him the question, which he's told me about years later, that one question in a way changed his life. "Would you like to learn some Torah?" And the answer was, "Let me think about it." And as my great uncle, Rebbe would say, the Americans, when they say, "let me think about it," it means, excuse the expression, go to hell. It's not your business. Bug off. Okay, 2 weeks went by. I get a call. Lee is on the phone. "Rabbi, you remember you asked me a question? Would I like to learn with you?" I actually would. And we started to learn once a week. For 10 years, I would go an hour to Manhattan, an hour we learned. He was a businessman in Manhattan. There's no time for, you got to learn, you got to go on. An hour travel, an hour learning, and an hour back. And this was the high point of my life, I can tell you, for 10 years, really. And I'm sure it was of yours. We went slow, and we finished all 53 chapters of Tanya. Not all questions were resolved, and there's a lot to say about that, but time is short. But we developed a very strong connection. And I didn't pressure him. Am I right? I did not pressure him. You're right. In fact, I remember that one time when you told me, some of your friends at the Reform Temple said, "What are you doing learning with a Chabad rabbi? All he wants you to is to put on a beard, put on tefillin, keep Shabbos, keep kosher. Like, are you out of your mind?" And you told them, you told me that you said, if he would have done that, I would have stopped learning, but he never did that. And then I asked him once to go to Eretz Yisrael, to come to Israel with me, and that was a life-changing experience. We met the option of a Rebbe, and it was transforming the whole time, the trip to Eretz Yisrael. And then then on another trip that he went himself, he told me already that someone at the hotel put on a yarmulke and said, don't, not smiling, with a serious face, don't you ever take that off. And that yarmulke that you see on the screen here never came off since that day, as far as what Eliezer told me, and I believe him. And with his long beard, you don't see his entire beard. He looks like the Alter Rebbe's chassid. So why am I saying this? I'm not saying this to make him feel good or make myself feel good. This is for the viewers. I'm saying this because we learned Tanya, and we learned it slowly, methodically, carefully. We didn't rush. We dialogued. We agreed. We disagreed. We laughed. We cried. It went into the bones. And I know that because he's teaching Tanya to others for years. And from time to time, he sends me an email or a call. He tells me, you can't imagine how this chapter in Tanya it's unbelievable. And it made this change. It's the Tanya is real, not just in the spiritual world, but in the daily world. And that's really what I wanted to focus on. But before that, and I'm finished with this, please just give us a little brief background, where you came from, a little about your parents, Melbourne, your background, your college days. Just bring us up to coming to New York, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very exciting to be with you, Rabbi Dalfin, because sometimes people ask me, they have an expression. I think I know what's an expression used by everybody. The expression is, who plugged you in? Who plugged you in? And you're the one who plugged me in, because it was really that connection to the power of Tanya that made a huge difference. To answer your question, I grew up in Melbourne, Australia. Melbourne has a very nice Jewish community. I mean, I think it's about today, maybe 50, 60,000. Have always been a very tight-knit Jewish community. And I was very fortunate. I went to a school in Melbourne called Mount Scopus College, which is a Jewish school, kind of like Ramaz. It's a modern Orthodox type of a school, boys and girls together. And I learned there the basic things, like I could read Hebrew, I could write Hebrew. I learned Chumash. We didn't learn Gemara, but I got some basic good Jewish education. So that never left me. So when it came time later in life to learn, it was actually much easier to get into it because of that training. So after I went to Mount Scopus, I then went to medical school in Melbourne, Australia. I finished medical school, and I came to New York really. The intention was to do some postgraduate medical training at the hospital in New York, Lenox Hill, and then to go back to Australia after 2 years. That was my plan. But, you have a plan. It's not always what's going to happen, right?
Right.
Mensch tracht und Gott lacht.
Yeah, exactly.
So I had a plan, but then I met my wife in New York, actually at a ski resort. I got married, and we stayed in New York. And then a little bit down the road, I said, this is not the career I want to pursue for the rest of my life. And to the great surprise of many people, being a doctor is like, the highest thing you could be, right? As a Jewish professional, as a doctor. So I said, no, it's not for me. So I left medicine. And then about almost 40 years ago, actually, I went into the insurance business. And so that's what I've been doing ever since. And thank God it worked out very well.
What about your parents were from Russia?
My mother's family is from Lodz, Poland. My mother's grandfather, yes, my great-grandfather, my mother's grandfather was actually an Alexander Chasid. I have a picture of him. You have
to send that to me. I'd like to see it.
Okay. He was shot by the Nazis on the street, just shot, finished. My father's family is from Russia. My father's father was from Gomel in Belarus. And my father's mother was from Ukraine, where all the problems are occurring. She actually is near the Black Sea. She was born in Melitopol, which is very close to the Black Sea. But they both of my father's parents left Russia at the time of the pogroms in 1905. They went to China and they lived in Harbin. There was a Jewish community in Harbin in northern China, which is where they met. They got married and they had their family. My father was born in China.
Right. Now, your family name is Slavutin. You believe that it's because you guys came from Slavuta, from Slavita.
I don't know. I would love to think that's true because Slavita is such a wonderful name in Tanya. But all I know is my father's father is from Homel. And whether before that there was a connection to Ukraine, I don't know.
No. And do you have any idea if they were Hasidic, your father's relatives? Were they Hasidim?
My father's, let me try to think for a second. My grandmother, my father's mother's family were, I think, very religious. My father told me about his uncle or grandfather who was very strict, and if a piece of silver touched something, he would go outside and bury it in the ground. I mean, so there was that side was, I think, very religious. My mother's family in Poland, I don't know how religious they were. They're a very traditional Jewish family, but I'm not sure how strictly religious or not they were.
Right. Okay, so now you're growing up in Melbourne. Now, I know some of your friends. They were on the Orthodox side. You weren't. What were your feelings growing up? How did you look at that? Did you have any anger on any Jewish issues? You want to just for a moment talk about that?
Yeah, it's. I mean, I grew up, as I said, I went to Mount Scopus, and Mount Scopus is a Jewish school where basically 50% of the time is Jewish studies and 50% secular. And I wasn't very interested in the Jewish studies. I really wasn't. I was much more interested in mathematics and science. And in the final year of high school, I did very well on the science, and I failed Hebrew. And the principal of the school, Mr. Feiglin, the Feiglin family, very famous Chabad family, Mr. Feiglin took upon himself, because we got a report card at the end of the first term in senior year of high school, he writes on my report card, which my father has to see because he has to sign it.
Yeah.
Mr. Feiglin writes my Hebrew result, which I failed. This is an utter disgrace. My father has to see it and sign it. So I was in trouble. So I had to pass Hebrew. And thank God I actually had a wonderful Hebrew teacher, Dr. Ronder, blessed memory, who was a survivor of the camps. And you could see on his arm, you saw the number from the camps. And he really helped me. And thanks to his help, I ended up, I passed Hebrew. But I was not a great Hebrew student.
When you became a older teenager, did you ask yourself any questions about God, things like that, philosophical issues? Not really.
My mother, and I'm very grateful, my mother raised me, and I always remember she would say to me as a young boy, you have to know two things in life. One is honesty is the best policy. Number two, always have faith in God. She taught me from, I don't know where, why, but she said that again. So I grew up with faith in God. That was never a problem or issue to have faith in God. I wasn't observant, religiously observant, but I always had faith in God. And you're asking me, did I have questions? Yes, I had questions as a lot of teenage kids. What am I doing here? What am I supposed? What is life about? Philosophical issues. And this is one of the reasons today I love Tanya so much, because it answers these questions, these fundamental questions that Alter Rebbe is addressing every day.
Absolutely. Okay, so you go into insurance, you get married, you joined, I believe, a Reformed Temple, right? I forget the name now. And take it from there. What happened?
Oh, This was a big blessing for me, what happened. It's something, I think it's something everybody who's not yet observant, who has some kind of inkling, should pray for what the gift I got from God. I was in the Reform Temple. I was what you would call a high holiday Jew. I went with my wife, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. That was it. 3 days a year? That was it. So I'm there on Yom Kippur, 1994. I'll never forget it. And it's between Musaf and Mincha, the break. People go outside for some fresh air. I wanted to stay inside the synagogue. I was by myself. I don't know what prompted me. I sat there. I said to myself aloud, this feels good. From that moment, it's as if the gates of heaven opened up. I'm telling you, one thing after another. So what happened? That was, let's say September, October, the Jewish holidays. About a month later, I go to Australia to visit my parents because my mother's having surgery. My friend, George Hallis, who you know, gives me a book. He says, Lee, you're going home now, back to New York. You have a long flight. Read this book. The book was called Encounters by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, a phenomenal teacher. And somewhere along the way in his writings, he says, look, if you're a Jewish man, you should do one thing. Put on tefillin, say the Shema. It'll take 10 minutes. That's all it takes. So I started. That 1994, that was the year I was going to buy tefillin. Now, here, that's the first thing. George gives me the book. Then I say to my wife, I'm going to buy tefillin. She has a client. We're in business together. Her client is a Syrian Jew, Orthodox. He hears I'm buying tefillin. He says, no. You're not going to buy tefillin from a Judaica store. I'm going to get you kosher tefillin.
Right. Sunny Shalom, right?
Got it. Sunny Shalom of blessed memory. Incredible man. Now he starts to get involved with me, and he hears I'm putting on tefillin. So about 2 months later, he says to my wife, what's your husband doing? He's saying the Shema. He says, I want you to give a message to your husband. Tell him he has to say the Amidah. One thing like this, but I'm telling you, Rabbi Dalfin, one after the other. You mentioned in Jerusalem with the yarmulke. Here's what happened. I'm in Jerusalem. This was around the time that you and I went. Maybe it was after another trip I went. I'm standing on the street. Here's the story with the yarmulke. I'm standing on the street outside a silver store. I just bought some gifts for my wife and friends. And at that time, I was not wearing a yarmulke outside the house. I wore it inside the house, but I was too embarrassed to wear it outside. But in Jerusalem, everyone's wearing a yarmulke. I had no problem. So I'm wearing my yarmulke in Jerusalem. A stranger comes up to me, puts his arm around my shoulder. I think, oh, yeah, he wants money.
Yeah.
He says, Chadash. What? What do you mean, Chadash? He said, your yarmulke looks so new. You should wear it more often. I said, that's it. This is a message from the Almighty God. I'm no question. And from that, as you said, from that day, I never took it off. So this happened again. It's like, I'm telling you, God said, you're ready. I'm going to give you what you need. And I said at the beginning of this conversation, if anybody has this kind of an inkling, they want to start to get more involved, ask God to help you. He will help you.
Oh, very well said. Now, when did the beard come? And could you tell me a little bit about the beard?
Oh, wow. That was one of the biggest challenges, the beard, as you could understand. So the beard came, I was reading a book, Think Jewish, by Rabbi Zalman Posner of blessed memory. And I loved the book. And I looked at the inside, the flap on the back of with a picture of Rabbi Posner, and he has a very kind face. I looked at that picture, I said to myself, this is a very kind face. I want to meet this man. I looked up, I called Nashville, Tennessee, where he lives. Operator, do you have a listing for a Rabbi Zalman Posner? I get on the phone, Rabbi Posner, we never met. I'm reading your book. I'd love to meet you. He said, you want to come to Nashville, Tennessee to meet me? What for? I said, I would just like to meet you. Your book is really great. So I go to Nashville for 2 days. And at that time, somewhere in my mind, because this was already like 10 years into the process of being observant, going on that pathway. My father had passed away just that year. I was starting to say Kaddish for my father. And I was thinking somewhere about a beard, but I never grew a beard. And Rabbi Posner, every day we'd go to shul, and in the afternoon, he would tell me stories about the Frierdiker Rebbe. And he said he was sent by the Frierdiker Rebbe with another rabbi, Rabbi Baumgart. They went to the DP camps in Europe, and Rabbi Posner described what happened. He said, we were two young men, rabbis, wearing a hat with a beard and a jacket, and we approached the Jewish people in the camp, the DP camp. This is after the war, 1947, 48. They looked at us and they said, whoa, there are religious Jews in America. There are religious Jews in America. They were so excited. I said, that's it. I'm growing a beard. Because he made a point that he was there as a young man with a beard. I said, from that moment, I'm going to grow a beard. This was in 2004. September, just after Tisha B'Av, August. And I came home and it was the Labor Day weekend and everyone's not shaving, no big deal, right? You're not shaving, you're on vacation. Monday comes, my wife says, okay, you have to shave now. I'm not. So I'm telling you, Rabbi Dalfin, as you can imagine, it's like World War III.
Yeah.
It's a big situation because many women have a problem when their husband says, I want to grow a beard for whatever reason.
Right.
And I just said to myself, I've got to find a way to do this. I've got to find a way to do this. And I had a very important message, which you know about this. I met Rabbi Steinsaltz.
Yeah, we met him together.
We met him in Yerushalayim.
Yeah.
Then later on, a friend of mine sponsored a trip where Rabbi Steinsaltz came to speak in America. And my friend, very kind, arranged for me to have a private meeting with Rabbi Steinsaltz. I had no idea how great this man was. I mean, he's a very humble man. And I sit down with him, I tell him about my challenge with the beard. And he said, did you ever read a book by Franz Kafka called Metamorphosis? I heard about it. I mean, Steinsaltz knew everything. I mean, Talmud, philosophy, science, he knew everything. He said, in this book, a man goes to sleep at night with his wife. He wakes up in the morning and he wakes up as a cockroach. This is what it's like for your wife. It's shocking. It's very difficult. And for the first time, I understood how difficult it was for her. I mean, I'm all excited. When you get onto this pathway of going back to Yiddishkeit, you're like fired up. You don't have a clue what's going on outside. And I realize it's not easy for my wife. So I had to just somehow try to be as kind as possible, but not give in. I wanted to grow the beard. I felt it was very important. I even read the Torah portion where they talk, you can't shave the corners. I said, this is what God wants me to do. I've got to do it.
Why do you think she accepted it?
I think that one of the key ingredients is when a husband, whatever, starts to get on the pathway and the wife is not necessarily on the same pathway or the same pace. And several people told me, you've just got to go as slowly as you can. So on the beard, I couldn't slow it down. I didn't slow it down. But on the other things, like, I wanted to have a kosher home, but I did not force her what she can or cannot eat outside the house. I knew I could not force that upon her. And it turns out I just let her be herself, not try to tell her what to do. And as time goes on, she was the one who arranged to put in a dairy sink in our kitchen.
Beautiful.
So you have to give the person space.
Would you also say that she respected and respects you because of your integrity and honesty, that she saw that you're genuine in your desire to have that beard?
She said that to me many times since then. After we finally came to terms and we could accept what was going on, she does accept and admire, and she often says that my faith in God is a source of great comfort to her and to our kids.
Yes. Okay. You also met a few other interesting people since we met. Could you tell just briefly who were they that you met?
Another person I wanted to meet for many years, and I was very fortunate to meet, was Rabbi Shochet.
Right, Rabbi Emmanuel Shochet.
Yes, yes. And he, when I met him, he was already not doing so well health-wise. He was quite ill, but I was very fortunate. I was in Toronto on a business trip, and you actually helped me because you called his house
Yes.
before I came there, and I had a chance to meet him. I always admired him so much because he was such a wonderful writer and such a scholar. And I remember coming to him, and I had a few questions. And one of my questions was, I was anxious for my children to get more observant. And I had to realize, you can't force it. And I said to him, I would love my daughter to be more observant. And he looked at me and he said, the most important thing you can do with your children is you can give them unconditional love. This is the most important thing. Everything else is secondary. And that really went right in. It's a very powerful message.
And I also believe you met, was it Benzion Raider or someone in England?
Yeah. We had Shavuos maybe 10, 12 years ago. My wife and I were in London, and we stayed with Benzion Raider's daughter. They have a house at that time. I don't know where they are living now, but I think it was in Golders Green, and we stayed with them for Shavuos. Benzion Raider was a businessman, and he knew the Lubavitcher Rebbe very well. One thing he actually shared with me, which I remember, and God willing, I'm gonna put it into practice. He said he was writing a book called Challenge, and the Rebbe said to him, "It's very important when you're writing this book to have a lot of pictures and photos." And so, God willing, I plan to write a book relating to these Yiddish experiences. And my goal is to make sure I have a lot of photos and pictures in the book. But Benzion Raider was a very special person, and he gave me $1 that he got from the Rebbe, which I still have today.
Didn't you tell me that it was he, I think I told you about making Aliyah, because at a certain point, I remember you had a thought of making Aliyah many. And he said to you that the Rebbe said no. Was that him, or am I mistaken?
I don't remember if we had that discussion. I don't remember about the. No, I don't remember if we have ever had that discussion about Aliyah.
Okay, so let's talk for a moment about the Igeres HaKodesh Laskilcha Bina, which it's the fourth section of Tanya, the 11th letter. Numerous times you've asked me about this. We learned it together. Could you share with our audience your feelings about this?
This is actually when I learned this, I always remember, because there's many stories about particularly Mendel Futerfas, right? Mendel Futerfas. I never had the privilege to meet in person, but he's if you look at him, if you see pictures of him, you can see what kind of a man he is. Actually, we had the special privilege to meet his son, Beryl Futerfas, at his home.
Right, in Crown Heights. Yeah.
Mendel Futerfas had terrible hardships in Russia. He was in prison. I don't know if he was in Siberia, but he was really beaten up by the Russians. And he said, if it wasn't for this letter of the Alter Rebbe Laskila Bina, he wouldn't have made it through those experiences. And Laskila Bina, the Alter Rebbe is teaching us that no matter what happens in life, we have to see that there's something good inside it. And actually, it also goes back to there's nothing by accident. When I went on that trip to Israel with you, that first trip we did in 2003, I don't know if you remember this, you picked me up at the airport. We got into a taxi. We were driving from the airport to go to the family in Tzfat for the first Shabbos.
Yeah, right? Dr. Rosen.
Yeah. On the way, you had prepared a whole stack of sheets of different Gemara, this, that. And either the second or third sheet we learned is page 21 of Tanit, Gemara Tanit, on who? Nachum Ish Gamzu. And to this day, he is one of the most favorite of all the people in the whole Talmud, is Nachum Ish Gamzu, who no matter what would happen, the story is amazing, but the message is, no matter what happens, he always said, gamzu l'tova. And there are times in my life, we all have challenges, whether it's business or family. And I say to myself, thanks to those lessons and thanks to this letter in the Gerda Kodesh, I say there's got to be something good in this. And the other thing that we learn in Tanya is God is with us all the time. God is not in heaven. God is everywhere, everywhere. And the Alter Rebbe has a whole book on that subject. The second book of Tanya, entirely devoted to God is everywhere. So by the time you finish that book, you start to realize God is not just in one place. It's impossible. So if God is everywhere, God is with me right now. He's giving me this experience for a reason. Has to be a good reason.
I think you met Gil Locks, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, the HJB. Remember?
He wrote a book, There Is One.
But I don't remember when he saw me at the hotel, I was walking with you, and he saw me, he says, Dalfin, yes, because he was referring back to a Tanya shir that I gave in Los Angeles in 82, and he was there with 30 people there, and I'm teaching, I'm a single guy at Bucher, and I got a crowd, and I said, the Nefesh HaShenef Yisrael, the Alter Rebbe chapter 2, the second Nefesh of a Jew is a chelik elikami, is a part of God. He jumps up and he says, there are no parts. Wow. And everyone's looking. There are no parts. And so when he saw me with you at the Kaisel, he said, yes, Now, tell us a little bit about what are your feelings. You never met the Rebbe. That's from heaven. But yet, I feel like it's like you did meet the Rebbe. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think it's very important to say this because some people have a misunderstanding. Because I do have a very close relationship with the Rebbe. The Rebbe is very much a part of my life, very, very much a part of my life. And people have a misunderstanding. Some people outside Chabad can be critical of Chabad, but actually this is a fundamental teaching of the Zohar, that a tzaddik, a righteous person, is more present in the world. This is not Chabad, this is Zohar.
Right.
And this is word for word. This is mamish what it says. It says that tzaddik has a presence in the world more than when he was physically here. More.
Correct.
So the Rebbe is with us. It's not something that Chabad made up. It's going back to fundamental Kabbalah. So the Rebbe is with us. The Rebbe is very important to me because it's, we believe in God, but we can't see God. So sometimes we have challenges with our faith and our trust in God. But the Rebbe I can see. And the Rebbe for over 40 years was the leader of the Jewish world. And it says in one of the books, it says the light was shining on him. People were looking for him to make a mistake. He never made a mistake. He never went off the path. He was always 100% devoted to the Jewish people. He was like the Moshe Rabbeinu. And I look at the Rebbe, I watch the videos, I listen to what he says. There are times, Rabbi Dalfin, I go to the Ohel to visit the Rebbe's grave. And I pray. I say before I go, there's a room you go into in the building before you go to the kever, where there's a TV and the Rebbe is on video.
Right.
And I pray, God, I want a message from the Rebbe when I walk into the room. And on my 70th birthday, I prayed, and the Rebbe is talking about how the carob tree only gives fruit after 70 years.
Wow.
So the Rebbe is part of my life. And I look at the Rebbe and I learn from him. I study his teachings because he is 100% righteous, pure, holy. He is our connection to God. He is what allows us to get close to God as a physical human being. And, there's a story. Someone one day was in the shul when the Rebbe was here with us physically and watching every move of the Rebbe. And the Rebbe turns around and says, Basav Adam, I'm flesh and blood. Don't look at me like that. I'm flesh and blood.
Yeah, right.
But he's holy flesh and blood.
Absolutely.
Very important connection is to have that connection with the Rebbe.
How how do you see the whole COVID experience in God's plan?
I'll never forget, maybe 2 or 3 weeks into COVID, I watched a video of Manis Friedman, and he said something very profound, which really opened my eyes. He said, people before COVID, every night, going out for dinner, going to the theater, going to a baseball game, they can't do any of it now. Can't do any of those things. What are you left with? You're at home with your family. So it's stripped away. God actually stripped all the mishigas, stripped it away. All you have now is your family, your home. You pray to God, you learn, you can do business from home, you can do it remotely, but all the other stuff is gone. All the distractions removed. It was that was a blessing. COVID was a terrible thing. People died, but that aspect of COVID was a blessing.
Yes. What do you see as the future for the Jewish people, Chabad Chasidim? Have you ever thought about this question?
We're learning it in Tanya now, chapter 37. What are we doing here? What is the purpose of our life here? So that's why I love Tanya, because it addresses these fundamental questions. So I don't look upon that question as a global question. I look upon it as a personal question. What am I supposed to do each day of my life to make my part of the world a bit lighter? The Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, said something very beautiful. He said, if in your corner of the world you see a little bit of darkness, that's great. You have a chance to make light, to turn that, someone is saying something to another person, they're being cruel, whatever. You have a chance to do something in a positive way. Then the Lubavitcher Rebbe said something also very important. He said, if you see the whole world as dark, you need to work on yourself.
Right.
So we have a job. The previous Rebbe called us lamplighters. Our job is to light a lamp, to bring light in every moment, whether we're in business, whether we're at home, whether we're in the synagogue, every place we are, there's always a chance to bring more light somehow.
Tell me a little about your teaching. I know you teach Dorot, and you've taught Tanya at, I think, either the Karlbach Shul or just a little bit about your teaching in the last 10 years or so.
There's an organization called Dorot in New York City, which is a not-for-profit organization dedicated to actually help elderly people, mostly focused on elderly people who are homebound, bringing them a gift on Purim or bringing them matzah or whatever. But they also have this wonderful program called University Without Walls, which is, getting on a phone, a conference call, and they hook me up with, say, 10 or 12 people, and I give a class. So today I gave a class at 1:00 on living with the Torah, named after the phrase that the Alter Rebbe said, you have to live with the Torah. So I take a Torah portion. So I spoke about Vayikra and about what does Vayikra mean, calling out God, connecting to us. And there are maybe 8 or 10, mostly elderly people. And God willing, they're going to get a message from the Torah that will inspire them, will elevate them, will change the way that they see that day.
And you also taught Tanya, didn't you?
I actually today was the Torah. On Thursday, I have a class called Applied Jewish Mysticism. So I teach from the Tanya, also sometimes from the Zohar, sometimes from a mystical teaching from the Torah portion, a lot of Tanya, yeah.
To the same Dorot group?
Same, not necessarily the same people, but Dorot, yes.
Right, but also, didn't you tell me once you were doing at Shul on Shabbos?
Yeah. Yes, I was. Before COVID,
right.
I think we used to do it either after the Kiddush or before or after Mincha. I would do in the Shul, the Chabad Shul, I would do a class on Tanya. And I went through basically from chapter 1, summarizing key points of each chapter and teaching Tanya.
Right. I also know that you have a very nice, strong relationship with Rabbi Baumgarten in the island, right? What's the first name again?
Label
Baumgarten, of course. And you've enjoyed that relationship. Both you and your wife have gone there many, many times, correct?
Yeah. We're going to actually be in East Hampton for Pesach. So we'll be with the Baumgarten family for the first nights and the last nights of Pesach. It's a wonderful community, beautiful community. It's such a great testimony to what the Rebbe is doing for the whole world. Because wherever I go, I mean, I've been to Italy, to Venice. I don't know if you've ever been to Gum Gum, that restaurant in Venice. You go there in Venice, Italy, of all places in the world, right? You go to Venice and there's a restaurant there called Gum Gum. On Shabbos, it's open to anyone. You can come in and have a meal there. You can daven there. One of the greatest experiences I had was in Florida. I was going to Florida with my wife for a wedding in the family. It was in Coral Springs or somewhere like that. And the nearest, I wanted to observe Shabbos. So the nearest Chabad was about a mile away. So I walked to Chabad. And on Friday night, I go to the rabbi's house. Rabbi is probably 26. His wife is about the same. I knock on the door. They're holding a little baby in their arms. And they have me there. I mean, I don't know if they had $5 to their name, Rabbi Dalfin. I don't know what they had, but they welcomed me to their home. I had a Shabbos meal with them. This is what the Rebbe has created all over the world.
Yes. Any final words you'd like to leave with our listeners and viewers?
I'll leave a message from the Tanya to hopefully inspire people to start learning Tanya.
Beautiful.
The very first chapter of Tanya, you read a book normally has an introduction and this and that, a preamble, not the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe starts chapter 1, first verse. He says, we learned at the end of chapter 3 in the Talmud of Nida that when a baby is born, from the Talmud, when a baby is born, an oath is administered to the baby before it leaves the mother's womb. This blew my mind the first time I saw it, because now the Alter Rebbe is addressing the whole idea of a child being given a mission and a purpose by God from day one. They can't even leave the womb. Now, you might say, what are you talking about? How can a baby get an oath? It's not through language as we see it, but God can communicate to a soul. We don't know exactly how, but there's a way. That soul is born into the world already on a pathway, on a mission. That's how the Tanya begins.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
Yasher, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. May Hashem help that you, your wife, your children, and your mother should be well. Everyone should be well, gesund, and parnosa, and only Yiddish nachas. And we should see Mashiach. We didn't really speak about Mashiach, but everything we said is about Mashiach. Because we believe that the Mashiach is around the corner, and we need to just do a little more to see him and be all together in Yerushalayim. Have a great day and a kosher and freilich Pesach. All the best.
Thank you. Same to you. Thank you.
Bye.
Amen.
Bye.